everyone. If you're new with us, welcome. It's great to have you. I'm Kainu. If we've not met, it's my privilege to pastor here. And we are walking through a teaching from Jesus. If you're just hanging out with a friend and accompanying them, we're stoked that you're here. And if you're exploring faith in Christ, that really He is central to all that we do. And so we're looking into the Bible. We're looking into the Word. If you have your Bible with you, you can open it up to Matthew chapter 6. And where Jesus is talking about fasting. Now, this week we're going to take 7 days, and ideally, just have water for those 7 days. Now, some of you, maybe your health does not allow that, so you got to make some adjustments and that kind of thing. But the point is to put away the normal, enjoyable eating that you do during the week, so that you can have a new experience. And we'll be digging into that as to why a little bit more this morning. But I got to ask, how many of you as kids or as teenagers, anybody here practice fasting? Anybody do that? Okay, okay, just a few of you. I did, starting at age 13. But we didn't call it fasting. We called it cutting weight. Any wrestlers out there? Okay? Yeah, cutting weight. And we would, of course, be coming up on a match, and you had to cut weight, drop your weight. And it's not a normal thing in our culture to do fasting. There's not like these big holidays that, hey, here's the holiday, whatever. It's not part of the cultural rhythm. In fact, just the opposite. Our holidays are eat like crazy. 4th of July, eat, Labor Day, eat. Thanksgiving, it's like the king of eating. And that, you don't know this unless you're a wrestler, that Thanksgiving is actually a secret form of torture for all wrestlers. Because it's that time of year. In fact, that's my memories of Thanksgiving as a young teenager were the Lions losing on TV. They've gotten better. And sitting at the meal and everybody digging into gravy and potatoes and stuffing and pumpkin pie and all of that. And I just got this little tiny bit, I'm like the outcast kid at the table. But it was by choice. Fasting is not common in our experience. And you certainly could ask reasonably, why practice fasting? It's a piece that Jesus talks about here in the Sermon on the Mount, where He is giving arguably the most influential speech that's ever been given in human history. And we're breaking that down a bit. I appreciated last week, Pastor Jeremy, he talked about, our typical New Year's resolutions about getting to the gym or eating healthier or financially, etc. But I thought he did such a great job of saying, okay, what are we doing? Like, what is truly the highest goal? And our highest goal around here is to get close with the Lord, to be with Jesus, to be like Him, increasingly all the time. And so, what's it going to take to get toward that goal? That's why we're walking through this series called The Narrow Path. That teaching obviously comes from Sermon on the Mount. And I would ask you that during this time, and I hope that just increasingly, especially if you call this place home, that you will be continually praying. Like, even in this moment, that you just start silently in your own mind praying for those that are sitting around you, that they might, whatever their need is, that God would meet that. And that you yourself be praying that the Spirit would speak to you, speak to me, that we would receive from Him, even today, that we might go toward that goal of being with Him and being like Him, okay? So, start those prayers right where you are. And as I'm teaching here, chapter 5 versus chapter 6, I want to give you the context a little bit. Matthew 5, He's just laid out 7 commands, and they are to acknowledge the law, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't divorce. He gives the directives on that, oaths, eye for eye, love your enemies. And of course, he has all these details to all that, but He's giving these, essentially, these commandments. And then in chapter 6, it's what's sometimes called the 3 devotions, that speak to our motives much more. And it's generosity and prayer and fasting. That's what he lays out by contrast between these. And what you'll realize that the way it progresses in Matthew 5 and Matthew 6 is something like this, that Matthew 5 talks about mercy, Matthew 6 talks about faith, chapter 5 is what, Matthew is how, and then we have our actions and our motives, and then we'll repeat what and how, just in case you didn't get that. This is the movement that's happening. And one scholar, he puts it this way: when you move from chapter 5 to chapter 6, the chapter 5 warns about the dangers of evil deeds. And chapter 6 warns about the dangers of good deeds. And that might sound weird to you, but the scholar goes on, he shares it this way really well, where he says, Jesus begins by warning about the very righteousness he has just taught. He's saying, and now in chapter 6, there's this warning about chapter 5. Righteousness can be harmful. Luther often insisted that our righteousness is more dangerous than our sin. For righteousness can serve the most self-centered of all desires, self-glorification. I mean, we know glory to God is this phrase that we've heard, but so often our lives are committed to glory to me. The teaching of Jesus between these two chapters, it started out learning how to do the right thing, and then we are to learn how to do it for the right reasons. Parents, this is a challenge when you have kids growing up, especially, when they're growing up in a spiritual environment. How do I teach them to do the right thing, to pray, to give, to serve, if we were to do fasting? But yet also, how do I teach them to do it for the right reasons? You know that bind. And especially as they grow older and you're like, how much do I make them? How much do I make them pray? How much do I make them study the Bible? How much do I make them go to church? Because we're trying to, you get what I'm saying? There's this tension between the behaviors that need to happen and the motivations. Sometimes it's even in the most spiritual context that we have the most danger of being disconnected. I have a buddy, his mom was hardcore in church. He went to a Christian school that doesn't exist anymore. And I said, how was that? He goes, well, that's where I learned how to smoke. And what happens for all of us, and not just kids in Christian schools, but full-grown grown-ups in churches and stuff, sometimes we learn how to live a double life, don't we? Like we know how to say the right things in the right space, but then we've got this other part of our life that we're working really hard to keep covered up. And Jesus is talking about the importance of authenticity, of sincerity. He's not talking about perfection at all, but he's saying do the right thing, and by the way, it's vital that you do it for the right reason. And that's why we're drawn to Jesus, because he's so authentic. He can back it up. And he's talking about the dangers of spiritual self-promotion. In chapter 6, at verse 16, the directive, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. So these individuals, you can think back in that day, it wouldn't be unusual to do sackcloth and ashes. You've heard that phrase before? It's this idea of get out of your comfortable clothes, put on this burlap, prickly sack, and go, and then ashes all over your head, so that it's just this idea of lowness to the ground. And for a period of time, that could be combined with fasting. What evidently was happening was that it gave you status the more spiritual and religious you are. We have a hard time relating to that in our culture because it's not necessarily the case. But within the church walls, we certainly know that. So these people, he's calling them out. He's saying, don't be like the hypocrites. Again, last week, Jeremy opened up the fact that these are like stage actors. They're like pretenders, that they're playing a role. And Jesus' warning is, don't do the right behaviors for the wrong reasons. That practicing godly actions for human applause, that does not turn out good in the end, is what he's saying. Now, expand this out just for the human craving of self-promotion. That's what's happening. These individuals, they're acting a certain way spiritually so that their status elevates, so they look important, they get the applause. It's self-promotional. Our world rewards self-promotional behavior for sure. In fact, it's literally become a new industry, like a new career. And at least new in its title. Gen Z on social media and social media influencers, 57% said they'd like to be a social media influencer if given the opportunity. 53% viewed it as a respectable career. It does make me curious about the 4% that want to do it but don't think it's respectable. But anyway, the average monthly income, according to one source, is that the micro-influencers with 1,000 or more followers can make $1,400 a month. The mega-influencers with 1 million or more can make about 15 grand. There is one other research piece that's summarized actually by a counseling center for youth in America. and they said this, that social media personalities earned a collective 700 million. I think that's actually probably low. Because some of these big dollars are being made by teenagers, right? And how do you get that? Right here. It's like, hey, you know, you do that. There's a reason that I don't really make as much money. I mean, I could if I wanted to, but I don't really want to. Where was I? What was I? You know, this is nothing new. Nothing new to promote yourself. We all did. You know, we've all done it all our lives. I'm trying to make the team. I'm trying to get on, into the theater. I'm trying to get the job. Amongst my friends, and I'm stretching the stories, or I'm making sure so-and-so doesn't get credit, whatever. You know what I mean? You're vying for status. And it's an age-old effort to push myself forward, to make a good impression, to get the approval of people. And Jesus is saying, that's really, really dangerous. Now, what exactly Jesus' opinion is on social media influencers, we'll skip that for today, but he clearly says spiritual self-promotion is a bad choice. Verse 16, the second half of it says, truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Those that stand up and they're looking like, either you say, oh my gosh, I feel for that guy, he hasn't eaten in forever, or you look at them and say, wow, how impressive is that? If that is why they're doing that action, Jesus is saying, so the ones that say wow and then they applaud, there you go. That's your whole reward. And Jesus is saying, don't make a bad trade. Fasting is supposed to honor God, not me. Fasting is supposed to be self-sacrificial, not self-promotional. And it's supposed to decrease my pride. It's not supposed to increase and elevate my pride. And Jesus is saying, do not trade diamonds for dust, because that's what these guys are doing. Narrow path. Man, Jesus is like, follow me. It's not narrow because it's hidden or it's tricky. It's narrow because a lot of people don't choose it. In fact, most people don't choose it. If you go back to the beginning of this chapter, verse 1, he says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. Doesn't mean your Father doesn't love you. Doesn't mean he doesn't want good things for you. It just means he's saying, oh, okay, you're on your own plan. Let me know how it goes. Self-promotional life steals your soul. Anybody by chance watch Swamp Kings? Do we have that? Swamp Kings. Anybody out there? I have no friends. This is great. Okay, there we go. There's a couple spiritually mature individuals. I love it. Swamp Kings, it's about the Florida Gators when they went on to win these championships. And if you know anything about college football in the South, it's even more popular than the NFL. It literally is like religion, right? Going to church on Saturday at the stadium. Urban Meyer, he had done well at a couple colleges, including Utah. He was hired on with the Florida Gators to try to bring them back to glory. And here he is as the coach. And if it is religion, then there's your head pastor, okay? He put together an impressive group. They disciplined themselves, and over a course of time, they won 2 championships. Several players went on to the NFL, including Brandon Spikes, who played for a few NFL teams. And it was Spikes, after they'd won their second national championship, he said, Coach, how do you feel? You just won your second national championship. That must feel amazing. Now the imagery, there's Coach holding up his second trophy. And you see in this documentary where he quotes Spikes speaking to him, saying that must feel amazing. And he said in his mind, he answered the question. He said, no, it doesn't. In fact, before they had gotten back to the locker room where he asked this question, he said, I was on the phone recruiting for next year. I had no time to celebrate. It was back to work. Because now, for Florida to do anything less than win the national championship is what? It's failure. It's failure. He would go on for another couple years, until one morning he was curled up in the fetal position in his bed in a deep depression. He said it's not the kind of thing where you just feel down and you feel a little bit sad. It's like you can't move. You can't move forward. It impacted his family severely and entered massive counseling to walk through what was going on with him. He said this phrase, he goes, if you ever chase perfection, good luck, because you're chasing a ghost. And I don't know why he was chasing that ghost. But I have to believe that somewhere deep down inside, he had an audience in his mind who he was looking for their approval. I don't know if it's his dad. I don't know if it's his friends. I don't know if it's the media. I don't know if it's all these young men on the team. I don't know who it was. And in a way, he's living a fake life. He's holding up this trophy. And inside, he's melting down. You ever been that way? Some of you're looking after some kids in Sunday school. Maybe you're leading a life group at home, or you're leading some sort of study, or you're out serving, and you're doing all the right things. But inside, you're like, man, I'm melting down. Could it be that in your service and in what you've been doing, there's been some seeking the applause, and it's just coming up empty now? And I see so many people quit church for this reason. They just wake up one day and they're like, this is a game. And I'm not good at it, and I don't want to play it anymore. And this is why Jesus is saying, hey, don't be the central character of your life. Don't be the star of your own movie. Go out of your way. In fact, what this would teach us is I got to go out of my way to promote Jesus and do it at the cost of self-promotion. I got to become less so he can become more. That's what his cousin did, John the Baptist. You know, it's so cool also. In all this, Jesus, he's not saying, hey, if you spiritually show off, I'm just going to hit you with lightning and I think you're a terrible person. He's just like, hey, you're making a bad choice. Like, you're losing out. You're losing out. If you're exploring faith, God has no need to hold us down and so that he can prove that he's the big man and that we're just these lowly scum on the earth. That is not the heart of God at all. He is not threatened. You and I aren't that impressive next to him, and anything that is impressive is because of him, and he knows it. And he looks at us and he says, I got so much more for you. I have so much more for you than you know. It's the haunting. It's why you can't walk away all the way. Some of you want to quit, but you're like Peter, you're like, where else would we go? But you're stuck. And what God is saying is, I have more for you. You're faking it. Stop faking it. Don't walk off. Don't give up. I'm the one that will hold you together. But you got to become more real. You've got to become more vulnerable. You've got to look at the things that you want to be that you are not, and you need to kneel down in humility and say, God, I just want to be so much more than I am. But I thank you that whatever I am comes from you, and that you want good for me, and that you want me to grow and become more like you, and I can. And you can. You can, guys. This doesn't have to be a game. It doesn't have to be fake. It doesn't have to be a show. I've been in this gig for like 40 years now. And I've said, if I'm ever pretending, if I'm ever faking this thing, I'm out. Because I just don't have any desire. Just don't have any desire to promote religion. And the cool thing is God proves himself faithful again and again. And he's saying, hey, I got a way better reward for you when it comes to your spiritual disciplines and the choices that you make. And he's asking, what do you want to get out of this? Do you want to get the admiration of people, or do you want to get nearness to God? Because one of them has a small, shallow payoff, and the other one has this massive, unending payoff. Do you want the reward of people's approval and miniature fame? That's what I try to remind myself, miniature fame. And what Jesus is saying, he's saying, hey, downplay your spiritual success, understate your kingdom achievements, serve without being discovered all the time, and give without being noticed every time. He said, go for the big payoff. There's a big payoff to self-sacrifice. He's basically saying, go for the mega millions, okay? By following me. He's saying, follow Jesus. Jesus is saying, hey, follow him down the narrow path of self-sacrifice and let go of your striving for honor and do not self-promote, self-demote. I had to think about that. I'm like, can I say that sentence in our culture? Like, that's a sin in a culture that's consumed with self. And this isn't about self-hatred by any stretch. God wants you to love everyone deeply like he does, including who? Yourself. So to demote yourself is not to dislike yourself. It's just to right-size yourself before God. And most of us in our clear-headed moments recognize, I can't quite compare there. And the sin of self-promotion, man, think about it. What do I do to make myself look good? What are the stories that I share? What are the people I'm hanging out with? Like, what are the clothes that we wear? The experiences that we mention. How often is that to elevate our respect, our admiration, our desirability in the eyes of other people? And what Jesus is saying is make a trade away from the sin of self-promotion over to the gift of self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice is such a privilege. I remember when I was talking with a guy the other day. He's just had a baby. He didn't have a baby. His wife had a baby, and and he's like, man, this has changed my life. And I said, man, I remember. When Sadie, our first, showed up, and I'm like holding this tiny little human, and man, my life just changed. In that moment. My wife, she had like that 9-month running start at it because she's been feeding the baby and sleeping with the baby and, carrying and doing all the really hard work and still does. And so she, but when this baby ended up in my hands, I'm like, man, I'm a punk. I'm a selfish man. And I got to change. And you know what that is? That's not a condemnation. That's an accurate assessment and an invitation. Invitation to the life that I actually want to live and to the person that I want to be. And this is what Jesus is saying. He's saying, hey, don't take the self-promotion route. Do great things, yes, but don't do it to promote yourself. Don't do it for the applause of people. Do it because I made you to give yourself away. And it might be a little confusing. You might be like, okay, wait a second. This is a little confusing. Like, are we supposed to hide our good deeds? I mean, think for a moment about what Jesus did say and what he didn't say in this directive. What he did say in this was, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others. For what reason? To be seen by them, to be applauded, to be noted, to be praised and approved of by them. Notice what he did not say. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others. He didn't say that. In fact, in chapter 5, he'd just been saying, you're the light of the world. And in verse 16, he says, let your light shine before others so they may see your good deeds. So we are to have our good deeds show off, but what's the outcome supposed to be? Glorify your Father in heaven. Stolen valor. You know what that is? It's taking credit from somebody who really made the sacrifice and attributing it to yourself instead of just giving it to the one that I made the sacrifice. This is what we're called to do, is to say, my life has been changed and that's why I do the good things that I do. And Lord, help me not to feed as much off the applause, the attention, or the adoration that might come to me, and somehow might it go to you. And if you're like me at all, man, you're not going to do that really well all the time. But it is a process. And some of you might say, okay, again, as far as if my fasting is going to be known, like we're supposed to not let our fasting be known, but yet we're hundreds of us doing this together, shouldn't I pick another time to do this? Which I would say yes and no. Often the apostles, they were generous in secret, but sometimes they did as a congregation. Check Acts 5 with Ananias and Sapphira. Sometimes they prayed in secret, and sometimes they prayed out loud. Stephen in Acts chapter 7. Often the apostles fasted privately, but sometimes as a group. If you go to Acts 13, they were all there worshiping and fasting. So they made decisions together. So that's why we do this together. And then Jesus, he regulates. Here's the attitude that you should have at verse 17 when you fast. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face so that it will not be obvious to others that you're fasting. Just don't make it obvious. Don't make a show out of it. Even if they know, make it like it's not a big deal. Hide your sacrifice in the midst of genuine joy. And even if you have to kind of push it. Because what Jesus is saying is, hey, you're imperfect and you're going to want credit for this. So go out of your way to remove that temptation. I know one couple, tremendous amount of awards and successes. They built a number of companies and sold them off. One of them in specific that they were a part of for decades became a national brand. In addition to that, altered an industry in the U.S. and is starting to around the world as well. These people are very, very familiar with success, with plaques, with praise, with applause, with all of that. What you may not know, if you've ever enjoyed a cup of coffee around here, if you've ever eaten one of the cookies and you're like, hey, I expected this to be dry and store-bought, and it's really good. If you've been to any of our meals, if you've been to our church picnics, and you're like, oh my goodness, what's with all this brisket and great food that's here? Sitting underneath that is this couple. They feel called to help this be a family that can sit at a table and share relationship like Jesus did. At least in little ways and sometimes in gigantic ways. And you don't realize what's going on behind the scenes. They don't do it to be recognized or promote themselves as great people. They do it to bring goodness to you and goodness and honor to the Lord. And they do it because their lives have been saved by Christ and they want to share that love in tangible ways. And so they've decided, you know what? And when they're tired, and there are times when they're exhausted because they've been working for hours and hours behind the scene, shopping and buying and cooking and prepping and putting in freezers and logistics and coordinating volunteers, and after many hours on their feet over hot grills and stuff, you would never know that because when they greet you, they have a smile. And when you say thank you, you say, oh, they always deflect. It's a team. It's a team. That is what Jesus is talking about. Don't make it look like you're the hero. Don't make it look like you're just killing yourself to do this. Don't require that when you do an act, let's talk about your roommate, let's talk about your friend, let's talk about your spouse, talk about your kids. Do it and don't keep score. Be the right kind of show-off. Don't show off yourself, show off God. Don't draw attention to yourself, draw attention to God. And we have lots of ways that we do show off, right? Some of us want to be the know-it-all. At least that's what I've heard. Some of us want to be the do-it-all. We're going to serve. Some of us want to be the believe-it-all. Like, I got the faith. It's the most impressive. And think for a moment, why is this an issue? Why is Jesus saying, hey, be really careful about this? And I will tell you, there is a powerful motivation that we all know, and it's this. Is I want to be noticed. And I want to be valuable. I want to be important, and I want to be impressive, and I want to be desired. And there's a lot of times I don't feel that way. There's a lot of times you don't feel that way. And is it bad? Is it bad to want to be noticed, to be valuable, to be impressive? No, I would say just the opposite. But the question is, where are you looking? Are you looking to people, or are you looking to God? Are you looking on earth, or are you looking to heaven? That's what Jesus is saying here. A bunch of us know that, but we forget it. Think for a minute, who loves to watch your life unfold? Who loves to watch you? Who loves to be there? And they are there. As I'm watching this documentary, Swamp Kings, there was one young man who was very successful, became outstanding on the team. And in a quiet moment in his interview, he shared about his background. He goes, when I grew up, I was born in prison. My mom battled addiction, and my dad had been in jail or in prison for about 90% of my upbringing. And then he just very subtly said, you look around and you realize, hey, there's not really anybody there for you. Not really anybody there to hug. He talked about not having Christmases, not having birthday parties. He was speaking about how meaningful it was when he then found this team. And some of you understand, like you understand his experience, or at least somewhat. Some of you know that more than others, because you've pretty much made it on your own. Like it's been you being able to will yourself to a place. And I want to share something with you. If you feel like, man, I feel pretty isolated right now. I feel pretty alone right now, and I have through a lot of my life. Think about what Jesus, he's just such a master. When he says this, he says, your Father who is unseen, your Father who sees what's done in secret. Think about that again. Your Father who is unseen. And the reason that he's unseen is because he's unseeable. He is too massive. He is too great. He is too grand. We think of us as a little ant trying to understand a human. He's so far beyond your capacity, and he has all the power. He has everything that you need. Here's the deal with the God that you can't see and that you hope is there and you know is there and all that is that's the same Father who watches you all the time. You can't see him, but he sees you, and he sees you all the time. Everything that you've ever done, everything you've thought. He never stops watching you. When you lay down at night and when you roll around, when you get up in the morning, he's watching you again. He sees the good and the bad, and he sees the flaws and the mistakes. He sees your highs and the lows. He saw your excitements. He does. He has never missed a game. He's never missed a recital. He's never missed a holiday, and he's never missed your birthday, ever. Do you realize, this is the God that Jesus is saying, hey, get to know your Father in heaven, and here's the narrow path. Stop pushing yourself so much and let yourself go, and what you're going to find is you're going to know your Father better and better all the time. And you don't have to fabricate your importance. You don't have to make it up. You don't have to push all the time to try to be great and to be acceptable and those kind of things, because he loves you. And a whole bunch of us know this challenge. I know this challenge for sure. Because I want what everybody else wants. I talked to a guy who's a very developed clinical psychologist, and he talks about babies. And that when an infant comes out, then an infant has to be seen, of course, seen and soothed, safe, and then they're secure enough to go out in the world by about 2 years old. And he's laying this whole thing out, and he said, and it made sense. Here's the baby. You got to see him, take care of him. You got to caress him. Babies that don't get caressed, that they're underdeveloped, and they have to have a safety in their environment, and then they can go out and be secure and as a toddler, get knocked down by another toddler and bounce back, Here we go. And getting ready for life and all that. And he said this amazing thing. He said that process of being seen and soothed and safe and secure, he goes, it never changes in your whole life. Some of you can't figure out why you keep going to a screen or to a bottle or making that call or going to another place. And it's because you are trying to find soothing. And so many times it's because we feel unvaluable and unimportant. And, we all want that. Some of us struggle with, my default nature is pretty self-promotional. And wow, you end up as a pastor, and you can develop some really unhealthy patterns of getting all this appreciation, applause, and all that. Now, there's a healthy side. There can be a healthy side to that. The scriptures say that we're to encourage each other, and we do. We bring fuel, and we bring God to other people in real time. And And frankly, we need physical touch and those affirmations. Man, guys, when we do these greetings and stuff, and you shake someone's hand, that might be the only healthy physical touch they've had all week. And we as humans, we need that. We can give that to one another. But God is offering me to get free, and he's offering you to get free. And I hear him saying to me, stop worrying about your flaws being exposed, and stop worrying about what people think, because I love you. I desire you. I think you're amazing. And I'm proud of you, and I'm impressed with you, and warts and all, I approve of you. So go for it on the narrow path. And he's trying to tell me, he's like, hey, do this. Don't do the self-promotional thing as much as you do. I have grace for you. Thank you, Jesus, for that. But do it less. Starve your hunger for honor. Diminish your hunger and your pride, because it'll free you up. Some of you are stuck in your pride right now. You can't think. You love God. You want to move forward. And he's saying, hey, you need to humble yourself. Because you're holding up an image, you're projecting an image, and that's not what's good for you. Even if you're right, let it go. And God's trying to get me to relax a lot more, and maybe he is for you as well, saying don't spend so much energy on image management. As I hear him say that, he says, don't spend that energy on image management, because you are made in my image. And I will show myself through you, through your strengths and through your weaknesses. And I'm like, I don't know, Lord. Because I like looking good in front of people. I don't like looking flawed. And he's like, trust me, trust me, trust me. It's a better trait. And Jesus wants to move us from the emptiness to self-promotional living, and he's inviting us to the practice of fasting. And some of you might think, okay, wait a second, if I fast for the wrong reasons, well, perhaps I should take a pass on this spiritual practice. And Jesus doesn't say, I know you're going to blow this, so don't even try. He is obviously endorsing the practice. And that's why he says, when you fast, here's the way to do it. He himself fasted for 40 days. And it's not just this empty thing to try to prove, oh my goodness, I will suffer for God, and therefore I guess he'll give me some good prize at the end. It's not a religious contest, and it's not a pain for points before God. You know, and you could ask, well, then how does fasting help this? How does this help me get closer to Jesus? One of the main ways is that fasting can purify your motives. Because it'll teach you who you are. It's like this mirror you can look in and go, oh, that's who I really am. We're so deeply committed to comfort and pleasure and convenience. I was flying home, with Diana and I from a vacation, and I had this flat cookie bag, and in it had been a snickerdoodle, and now there was the remains of the snickerdoodle. And I went ahead and executed the mission and completed it. And she's like, hey, can I buy that cookie? And I'm like, oh, cookie's gone. And it wasn't there anymore. And then the flight attendants, just at that same time, said, please report any unwanted behavior. Fortunately, my wife didn't turn me in. You see who you are. Think of it in your family. Who needs the Snickers bar first? Who's the quickest to get hangry? Your body's like a chemistry lab. They're powerful drugs that are manufactured in our glands. If you've ever had a Dutch Brothers Marshmallow Dream Protein Latte, you will know that it will get you through a minor surgery without anesthesia. So fasting is a miniature suffering is what it is. It's a chosen voluntary miniature suffering that you enter, and it reveals things in us. Pastor Susie Silk, she says this about suffering. She says she's talking about Paul in Romans chapter 8. He's talking about suffering and persecution. He talks about it as normal, an expected part of living as Christians in a world that's enslaved by sin. So we need to learn to embrace struggle and suffering and not always run away from it. Some of you are saying, I don't have time for this. This is going to be a hassle. This is going to have all these things going on. Now, if you have health considerations, that's a different story. I got a buddy who's hypoglycemic. He can't do the same thing that everybody else can do, but he can do something. And you can as well. And instead of just going I don't need that hassle, Jesus is saying, yeah, actually you do need that hassle. Because you're hooked on drugs, buddy. It's called sugar. It's called caffeine. It's called steak. And these are all beautiful things and beautiful gifts, but we need to put them on a shelf for a period of time. And Jesus uses discomfort to reveal our level of discontent. And he's inviting me down that narrow path. The more content I am with Christ, the less aggressive I am when I'm not eating. So fasting, it can purify your motives, and fasting can strengthen your faith. One discovery, one privilege as being a wrestler as a kid is I look back and realize that you can go a few days without food without dying. That's actually a really valuable thing to learn. Because you just don't freak out as much when you tell your body, hey, body, quiet down. And we appeal to the Spirit of God leading us instead of just our feelings and our flesh. I want to ask our musicians to come down as we consider a quote. Gerald Sitzer, severe loss in his life as a professor up in Eastern Washington, actually. And he writes this about the desert saints. He says, the desert saints believe that struggle is normal, necessary, and even healthy in the spiritual life. And the fallenness of the world imposes suffering, such as physical sickness and mental anguish and death of a loved one. Discipleship requires suffering, such as self-sacrifice. And believers must choose to face it. We therefore cannot escape struggle, nor should we try. At least not always. And he goes on and finishes up, saying, rather, we should embrace suffering as one aspect of our calling to discipleship. For the goal of life, catch this, the goal of life in this world is not ease, prosperity, and success, but intimacy with God, maturity of character, and then taking the gospel out into the world. Will you, in humility before God and all your own frailty and brokenness and imperfections, will you this week say, okay, I'm going to run from this time Sunday to this time next Sunday, and if your health allows, just drink water. If you need to modify it. But today, will you make a decision to say, I'm going to, as Paul says, I'm going to buffet my body, lest after I preach, I'm disqualified. Like he's reining in a good gift from God that has these big flaws in it, his physical body and appetites. Would you bow for just a moment right where you are? And would you lift a simple prayer as a question, is just to say, Lord, how would you have me fast this week? Some of you have already made that decision, but ask that question anyway. Something comes to your mind, say, hey, Lord, is that thought from you? Then ask another question of yourself. Will I commit right now to some kind of fasting this week?